this is just a few slides really that I thought I'd talk off with you all about why you shouldn't trust consultants and what to do about that. And I mean that, this is not reverse psychology. Genuinely, in a lot of cases, you shouldn't be trusting the consultants that you come into contact with. And I want to explain why that is in a way that I hope helps to illuminate what it means to actually look for and then ultimately select the consultants that can help you, right? So even though this looks like it takes quite a negative way into it, it's actually intended ultimately to equip you to make good quality decisions about who you work with. And I hope that there's some useful food for thought in here. If you've got questions as we go, whack your hand up. I'm more than happy to take them as we go. There's not a lot of data or information on these charts. It's just stuff to talk off. And then we'll have time for some discussion at the end, okay? Just to give you a sense of who you're talking to, my name is Phil. I will not describe myself as the king of consulting. I'm basically just a very naughty boy, but I've been doing this for a long old time. So I've been in the industry for about 25 years now, started in marketing as a marketing consultant. These days do a whole range of different things I'll come on and talk to you about. Basically, I've been out in the world as an independent consultant. I run 3 different practices. I've been doing it for 12 years now. I have won lots of awards for consulting from the Management Consultancies Association, from the British Culture Awards, Business Culture Awards, sorry, and various other places. I've worked with a huge number of businesses, me and my team. Some of them you can see listed there. My great passion, actually, and I say this not because of the audience I'm with today, it's genuinely true. My great passion is to support people who are trying to do risky and interesting things for themselves. So much more than working with the big corporates, I like to work with startups, scale-ups, and other consultancies. Basically, that's where the kind of my passion is, I suppose, because I feel myself I've taken lots of risks in my career and tried to do things differently. So I have a huge amount of time and respect for those who do the same. I have a 97% client retention rate across my practices. I will talk to you about dependency in consulting later on and why it's something to be avoided. We measure retention in our practices around, do clients come back and ask us to help them solve another problem? So we're not interested in the creation of dependency. We ask clients to, if the relationship's good, they'll come back to you basically if they have another problem. So that's how we measure that. And the vast majority of our business is won through word of mouth and referral. There are trust issues in our marketplace, which I'm going to talk about, which kind of mandate that. But at the same time, the reason I'm sharing all these bits of data with you is to say, I think you're talking to somebody who knows what he's talking about when he's talking about the world of consulting and how to make impact on client organizations. So look, you might not trust consultants. That's where I want to start the conversation today. I mean, you hear all those cliches, don't you, about they borrow the watch to tell you the time. I had a client turn around to me about 4 or 5 years ago, and he just said, oh, you're another cockroach then. You know, when I get you in, I won't be able to get you out. That was a charming beginning to a new business meeting. You do get those things from time to time. Very commonly when I start, or we start in my larger practice, work with clients, you'll just hear people talk about how they've got burned, really, really badly burned by consultants and consultancies. And I think it's worth examining why some of those cliches are true and why a lot of people report having bad experience with consultants. You're right not to trust them. And fundamentally, there are 4 reasons why it's very, very sensible not to, or to be wary where consultancies are concerned. The first one is incentive misalignment. So I wrote about this actually in a Substack that went out a week or 2 ago. But fundamentally, the consultant will get paid a lot of the time, regardless of whether or not that consultant makes an impact on your business. That's a fundamental misalignment of incentives. The second thing is that the way that consultants generally get remunerated, which is hour-based or day-based, often by time, also introduces a misalignment of incentives, because what it effectively does is it encourages the consultant to slow down in the solution of the problem, right? Or in pursuit of the solution of the problem. Really good consultants, really good, by which I mean the top 5 or 10%, don't behave in that way and are very conscious of incentive misalignment. But it is very, very common in our industry. And there are reasons why that exists, right? There are reasons to do with the nature of the consulting business model, and the desire that all human beings have to protect themselves, why consultants get paid in the way they get paid. But you have to understand your incentives and the consultants' incentives are not always that well aligned, and we'll come back onto that later on. The second builds on the first, and it's around what Nassim Taleb in his very good books, Anti-Fragile, The Black Swan, and the one that I like the most, which is called Skin in the Game, refers to, which is this idea of risk asymmetry. Fundamentally, a consultant can go into your organization, give you a ton of bad advice, create quite a considerable amount of damage in your organization, and then roll out again. You might want to read the book When McKinsey Came to Town. That's a really, really shocking indictment of that particular very large practice around some of its own behaviors. But fundamentally, we have this asymmetry of risk. Again, there's a complex area, this, because it's not always as clean cut as just around money and around business harm. But fundamentally, if you take it right down to the simplest level, a consultant can come in, give you advice, and then ultimately be insulated from the consequences of that advice, right? So that's the second reason. The third reason is about logic, the application of logic. Half of all of us are below average at our jobs, right? That is irrefutable logic. We cannot dispute that logic, and it is true of consultants. Half of all consultants are below average at what they do. So you have a 50% chance of working with a consultant who's mediocre or worse, right? And again, what it means to find a good consultant, how do you interview, how do you profile consultants, all of that sort of stuff we're going to come on to very shortly. But, you know, the best consultants aren't always the best salespeople. Let's put it that way, right? So half are below average. We have to be aware that's the case. And then a more interesting concept, perhaps, is one that many consultants, because of the way that consulting, particularly management consulting, was born, are still stuck in a 20th century paradigm. And this is where I want to kind of just open the conversation up a little bit in terms of starting to point to the kinds of people I think you might want to be working with. 20th century thinking. So if you look at where consulting came from, it came from effectively a very factory derived view of the world that basically said, we have production lines, they need optimizing, there are going to be inefficiencies in how the machine is running, and we need to find ways to smooth those inefficiencies out. And the consultant and management consulting grew up in the 20th century almost as the person who can come into your organization like a savior and help you correct deficiencies in how your organization is running. What that gives rise to is a mode of engagement, which is basically you give your consultants permission to roam wherever they want to go. You become very reliant on them because actually fundamentally they're your savior. You can't do without them. And actually, ultimately, because they take quite a factory and production line based view of the world, they talk about optimization and structure and process and all that kind of stuff. They abstract the problems, tend to be sort of people to the back of the queue in terms of the people that work for you in your organization. I would say really good consultants, top 2 to 5% again, are thinking in a very different way now. Here we are in 2023. They would take the view, which is the view I take, which is that ultimately your organization is sufficient. You have all the time, you have all the energy, the passion, the commitment, the ideas, the intellect, the drive to be able to get where you need to go. You just stood in your own way in some way, shape, or form. So the consultant really in that case is not your savior, but your supporter. Now, supporter, don't read that as cheerleader. Read that as somebody who is going to offer you a leg up to help get you where you want to go, right? And that doesn't mean the relationship's always going to be harmonious. It doesn't mean you're not going to fall out. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be times when you're at loggerheads about the right way to move forward. But fundamentally, if you come from a place which is, this organization has everything it needs, it's just getting in its own way, the job of the consultant is to help point out to you where you're getting in your own way and help remove those blockers. What that does is it basically mandates a very different form of intervention. So it says, we are here as consultants to just remove whatever those blockers are. It doesn't necessarily need to be big long-term job. We're just here to help this business overcome this internally imposed barrier it's facing in terms of where it needs to go. We don't create dependency. Zero interest in dependency creation whatsoever, because ultimately, if the organization is sufficient, you don't need somebody working with you year in, year out, all the time, kind of thing. And you put people first, because all organizations are the sum total of the people that work within them, and it is the people in the organization who ultimately need to be the ones that are solving problems. The consultant is there to help and enable them to do that. So I would say good consultants these days, whether or not you buy that line of 20th versus 21st century thinking, or whether or not they would, is kind of immaterial. Good consultants would be hyper targeted, not interested in dependency creation, and think and act in a very kind of humanistic way in organizations. Again, without getting into more philosophizing here, organizations are actually the sum total of the people that work for them. We're moving towards a more humanistic and sensitive way of doing business. Good consulting takes that into account, and quite rightly too. So just to give you a sense, my work then, I take all those three things into my work, those principles into my work, and this is how it plays through in my own work. So I have three practices. They've been going for years and years. It's two more than I should have, but I keep seeing problems and wanting to solve them. I have a business called Corporate Punk, which fundamentally is about targeted interventions that are very people first and very large scale global organizations. I work with scale up and startup leaders on a one-to-one small group basis to actually help them remove blockers to growth through the power of their people. And ultimately, because I am ashamed of the behaviour of a lot of people in consulting, but I do think that consultancy can be a huge force for good. Actually launches next Friday, a business which is all about helping consultants to work in ways that are ethical, accountable, and people first. So money where my mouth is time in terms of some of this as well. So if you take all those things I've just been talking to, what I wanted to talk to you about was, how do you go about choosing the right consultant? So how do you go about avoiding some of those issues around risk asymmetry and around incentive misalignment and around mediocrity? How do you avoid all that? How do you ultimately make sure that you're choosing the right individual or individuals to work with? I would argue that there are 5 non-negotiables that that you really should be taking into account in the consideration of any appointment. And I would tell you, by the way, just out of interest, I don't know whether the group would agree with this or not, but certainly in my own experience, I very rarely see clients do all these 5 at all or well, right? So they are quite important, I think. The first thing is values alignment. So ultimately, if you don't share the values with the people you work with, divorce is inevitable. It's just a matter of when and how much blood gets spilt on the carpet. So for me, I have 5 values, which are integrity, creativity, excellence, mutuality, and grit. Those are the 5 things I care about most in the world. Doing the right thing, creation of new ideas, hitting extremely high standards in all of the work, treating others as I wish to be treated myself, and keeping going with clients, for clients, and in my work, no matter how hard it gets, right? Those are the things I care about. Every single one of my clients, we are aligned on those values. They may care about different things as well, but fundamentally, I don't work with people, for example, who aren't interested in trying to achieve excellence in their marketplace. I'm not interested in working with people who don't treat other people in the way that they would want to be treated. It's not going to precipitate a good outcome in the working relationship if those values aren't sufficiently well aligned. So while they may care about things that I don't, we have enough in common that there is the basis for a good working relationship. If you are not interviewing your consultants or profiling your consultants based on values, you are running the risk of setting the relationship up for failure. You would do this with employees. You would, hopefully be interviewing employees based on, do we have a shared set of values? You should absolutely be doing the same with any consultant that you choose to work with. I wouldn't want somebody in my business doing important work if I wasn't convinced we cared about a lot of the same stuff. Is the chemistry generative? So what I mean by that, if you come back to the idea that the consultant is not the savior, as in he's not going to come down or she's not going to come down from the mountain with the tablets of stone, but is here to support you in getting to good quality decisions and good quality outcomes for your business, the question is the chemistry generative, right? So what I mean by that is, can we get somewhere together that we couldn't get independently, right? That's what I mean. So for example, Matt Mauer, who is on this call, is a friend of mine. And whenever I sit on a call with Matt, I always feel like I learned something and hopefully Matt picks some stuff up as well. We have a fundamentally generative chemistry, right? When we sit together, actually, we can get somewhere together we couldn't necessarily get individually, right? And that's an important thing in any working relationship. I'm not looking at someone like Matt or anybody I work with to have all the answers. I'm looking for, can we, through conversation, get somewhere I otherwise couldn't get, right? That's what I mean by fundamentally generative chemistry. Tends to be, actually, we tend to enjoy that as well. The idea of generative chemistry tends to be, actually, I'm enjoying something about this interaction. That's usually a good sign. The energy is quite high in it, you know? The third thing, obvious point, but recommendations or referrals, right? You really do ideally want to be taking recommendations from people you know and trust. I don't know how much of that happens in this group, but certainly in other groups that I talk to and have worked with in the past, people will quite happily go to each other and go, who do you know who's any good at X or Y? I think it's really, really important. Going out to market, including making requests on LinkedIn, is a recipe to, end up in the soup of mediocrity that characterizes the consultancy marketplace. So I would say recommendations or referrals are really, really important where you can get them. If you can't get them, I would say take references. And ideally, what you want to be doing is asking the consultant to speak to a couple of clients, most recent clients. Don't just go off the greatest hits, go off the most recent ones, I would say, in that circumstance. You want direct experience of similar issues. So again, consultants can be, how to put it, wide boys, I think is probably the best phrase. So very, very good, a lot of us, at having the gift of the gab, because it's basically what we're paid for. We're paid for, to be able to interact in conversation, right? The question is their experience directly relevant to what you've got going on in your organization? Direct relevance doesn't necessarily mean industry specialism, but it can mean they have solved a very similar or problem or problems in other organizations. Not telling you that they can, talking in general terms, you want specific examples of where they've solved their problems similar problems in the past. And I would say the other non-negotiable is willingness to discuss incentive alignment. So I want to talk about incentive alignment in consulting now, just as we before we go to sort of questions or comments or anything like that, because I think it's a slightly more complex area than it's often held to be. But being willing to open a discussion with somebody about how you want to work with them in a way that feels equitable is, I think, a really good sign. And again, really good quality consultants are not going to be pushed around, right? We know our value, but at the same time, we will want to acknowledge and be sensitive to where businesses are at, and we will want to try and find a sustainable way of working with businesses. Sometimes that's achievable, sometimes it's not, but it's the willingness to actually embark on the discussion usually is a good sign, I would say. In my experience, clients don't talk to consultants about values. They don't really think about generative chemistry. A lot of the time, if you're feeling desperate for an answer, you'll just be looking for somebody to give it to you. I've been there many, many times, by the way. And so I'm not necessarily always thinking about, is the chemistry right in the relationship? You can sometimes fudge direct experience of similar issues because you think, oh, they've been in marketing, it'll be fine. But there are about 12 different types of marketing, and you need people that have got the right combination of skills for your specific marketing problem, for example. And that willingness to discuss incentive alignment, again, I can see how there's a lot of clients who either don't open those conversations or open them in the right way. So incentives, just to talk very briefly about this, I would say think about incentives in two ways when it comes to consulting relationships, although this is actually also true in general. The two kinds of incentives that are generally at play are financial and reputational incentives. So financial incentives go to how am I being paid for the work that I'm being done, the work that's being done here. The other one is reputational incentives. So this can be an advantage sometimes of working with independents or with smaller organizations. We actually do have more to lose a lot of the time. I am very fond of saying to clients and consultants I work with, the only thing I have to sell in the end is my reputation. And it's not a lie. I actually do mean it, because we are so reliant in my game, particularly given the certainly in corporate punk, the very radical and quite innovative form of consulting that we do there. We're really, really reliant on doing that job well and having clients refer us on and speak well of us. That is a huge disincentive to take on the wrong thing. It's a huge disincentive to not do a great job on the things that we do actually take on. And I would protect, personally, it's just a personal view, I would protect reputation over money any single day. But different consultancies are wired differently on that front. Some people some people care more about reputation than others. And some of the very big consultants that you probably wouldn't be in the market for anyway, but their brands are so strong, actually, if they get things wrong on a few occasions, it sort of doesn't matter to them. They're kind of insulated from it. But don't ignore the reputational incentive. It is actually quite a considerable one in this marketplace. So I would say, when you're having a conversation with your consultants about incentives, I'll just give you my own view on this, and you can agree or disagree with me. Knockouts for me would be payment by results as a bulk of the fee structure. I don't think it's plausible to expect specialists to come into your organization and get paid entirely or wholly on results. It's specifically really not plausible if actually those results, for example, go to overall business results and your consultant doesn't actually have the ability to influence a lot of the factors that influence those overall results. So, for me, generally, I'm very interested in payment by results. What I'm interested in is, can I isolate the things that our relationship with you directly has an impact on? And can we structure it in a way that means not that I don't have any downside, but that it is balanced downside and upside. So I get paid something for my time and my expertise, but actually I collect much, much more if things work out well. A really obvious example of this in my own background was I got invited to help a client on a big bid a few years ago. And I said, look, this is how I'll do it. I'll give you all the time. We won't clock watch on it. You'll give me a fixed fee of, it was about 60% of the total that we collected on it. And if you win, you give me the other 40%, basically. And that worked out very nicely for everybody concerned. It was a really, really good form of incentive alignment, actually. Allowed them to manage their downside and me manage my downside, whilst everybody actually benefited from the upside in the relationship. I would say that there are watch outs as well on this. I personally get... you hear this a lot. I don't know, again, whether it happens in this group or not, but I hear a lot people having conversations with consultants, usually in fairly loose terms about equity or sweat equity or whatever. I remain hugely skeptical about that for two reasons. One is, I actually think if you come back to the idea of consultant as supporter, that we're there to help you solve very specific problems at specific moments in time. I'm not sure that justifies having a position in a business versus those who are actually working in it and taking the risk full time. And secondly, just bluntly, I've seen a lot of checks being written on this that reality ultimately hasn't cashed. So, I'm not interested in loose promises underpinning our relationships. I'm interested in working out what is equitable and what the clear agreements are that we can all stick to. I also think too much too soon is another watch out, that the idea of really big contracts and really big projects from the get-go, any consultant that's lobbying for that, I would be very suspicious of as well. I think you need your consultants to be really quite targeted in what they come in and have a look at. So the golden rule for me anyway, in all relationships of this sort, you have to go by those 5 factors, navigate through by those 5 factors. I would say the golden rule is start small, but don't just spend enough money to fail. So the Queen, apparently, God rest her soul, when she used to buy racehorses, would say, let's just not spend enough money to fail. I think it's a brilliant phrase. It's this idea of, you go 3/4 of the way to solving the problem and therefore don't solve it at all and you've spent the money anyway. Don't do that. Sometimes your minimum viable engagement with a consultant is going to be bigger than maybe you want it to be, right? But that's the process of talking with people, getting in under the skin of what they've got going on in their business, and how this individual or these individuals can help you, and shaping a scope, right? Good consultants, again, top 5 or 10%, are not going to want you to spend any more money than you have to solve a problem. For one simple reason, it's back to incentives. So you go back to money and you go back to reputation. If we help you solve a problem and solve it really well, it's only going to, in the longer term, see our businesses right. And actually, it's better for business, in my view, because it means clients come back. The next time they have a problem they need to solve, they're going to trust you and they're going to go, you know who I need to pick up the phone to? Those guys, right? So I think if we're really smart about this and long-term about this, it works for everybody to be in that kind of mode. That's all I wanted to say. And, it's hard to pitch talks like this sometimes, because you find yourself thinking, well, I don't know what the collective experience around working with consultants and consultancies has been. I hope there was something in there that was useful. But I just thought, we could open it up for conversation and comment, and you feel free to challenge me on anything I've shared with you. I'm all up for a heated debate on this stuff, as a couple of you who know me will tell you. What challenges are you experiencing in deciding if and how to use consultants in your business? I'm certainly happy to give you a view on any of those, or a view on anything else that I've shared with you over the course of the last sort of 15 minutes or so.
Phil, that was excellent. Thank you very much. Have we got any questions for Phil? I know I've got 1 or 2. Gideon.
Thanks, Ollie. Hi, Phil. Thanks very much for your talk. I am actually a consultant, so it's a question from one consultant to another, I guess. I'm interested in the payment by results, and you obviously put an emphasis on that. But my business is research, and I think often the results are quite intangible. It might be influencing a decision being made, or it might be, in fact, influencing a decision not to be made, if it makes sense. So I'm just wondering if that, how you say it works for someone like me.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question. And I think it is extremely hard to hypothecate impact from research, isn't it? Because really what research creates is options for a business that it otherwise wouldn't have had. And it creates potentially clarity about what strategic decisions need to be made. I would say in that instance, Ollie, I am not sure that much payment by results is going to necessarily be as open to you as a route as it would be for other consultants who are perhaps working on projects or initiatives that have more directly interpretable commercial outcomes. So I think in that situation, you have to go back to the questions of money and reputation in terms of incentives, and you have to go, how do we continue to align? And it could actually be that ultimately reputational incentives are actually the more powerful one for you. Where when we start work with clients, we always say there are ultimately 2 things we're going to ask you as a client. So we have a contracting process when we start work with clients, which is where we talk about the conditions in which we're prepared to work with them and what it takes to set the relationship up for success. And there's 5 conditions we always talk to them about. But we always say at the end of it, we're going to ask you for 2 things. The first thing is we're going to ask you for a testimonial in about 6 months. And the second thing is we're going to ask you for 2 referrals. And if at any point you feel when those requests come, because they will come, unable to fulfill them, we need to know about that. because that goes to something being wrong in our relationship. And that's something that we would want to be discussing with you and paying attention to. And the way that we frame it with them is the only way our business grows ultimately is because clients like you, who we hope will be delighted with the work, will talk to other clients. And all that's doing, Ollie, is it's signaling very, very upfront in the relationship, we are reliant on you too, just in different ways than you might think. It goes beyond the invoice. So as I say, it might be for you, the payment by results route is less viable, although I'd have to understand a bit more about the research. It might actually be that more explicit contracting around some of those reputational incentives would actually be a better route, you know.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Gideon. Matt.
So I guess slightly irritatingly, actually, this works both directions. It's something that's bothered me about my own work when I've been in consultancy mode. It's also something that bothers me about thinking about working with consultants is the values piece, which we both know is essential. But what do you do when your client doesn't know their values and therefore is not capable of articulating them to see alignment, or where you want to work with a consultant who also doesn't know their values? I mean, we can do an exercise. I mean, obviously, one of the exercises I do with clients is, what are your values? But prior to engaging with them, I have to guess, based on my interaction with them, what do I think their values are? And I'd say I'm probably no better than 50-50 on getting, let's say, people who are not seriously signaling value misalignment.
It's a really fair question. I think I would say a couple of things. I would say, firstly, I regard a decision to work with a client as a two-way decision, and thereby I think it's entirely appropriate that I feel able to ask them questions that are relevant to their values, as vice versa. I also happen, by the way, to distrust a lot of what organizations say about their own values. The 3 times I've been seriously shafted over the last 12 years in business have all been by organizations that have had a value of integrity, right? So I don't really trust a lot of what organizations say. I think they're smoking their own press releases a lot of the time. So a good question to ask them, for example, will be, and I do actually ask this quite a lot, I would ask an organization, the last 4 or 5 people that you fired, why have you fired them? Right? And there's gentler ways of asking that question, but probing what tends to drive churn in the organization. Organizations accepting instances of gross misconduct fire people for values violations. So they fire people because the individual concerned doesn't care about the same thing that the organization cares about, and that usually shows up in behavior that the organization finds intolerable, and then people part company. So you can get a kind of sense from that sometimes. Sometimes asking leaders what really pisses them off as well actually is a really, really good way of getting into a question around values. And then all you do is you flip it, you can flip it 180 degrees and understand that actually positively this is what they care about. So, a leader who's really, really focused on detail, for example, like examining why that is the case in a conversation. It might be that there's a real obsession around customer service, or it could be that there's a real obsession around design excellence, or whatever it looks like. And again, you just start to get a sense of those things. So I think it's about sitting with it's about development of techniques that allow you to probe values in perhaps some indirect as well as direct ways, and then you go from there. And just to finally say, consultants who don't know their own values aren't consultants you should be working with, because I would argue very strongly that those people haven't got enough self-awareness to be actually operating at the right level as consultants.
Thanks, Matt. Neil.
Yeah. Hi, Phil. Sorry to miss a bit of that urgent client call. No, interesting to hear. I mean, it's kind of what I want to do is share. I am a designer, but got asked to join a couple of the big consultancies. And one thing that I learned on that, which frustrated me with the organization, is the intention of the consultancy. What are they looking to try and achieve to support their own business? I went into one big consultancy whose initial started with A, and they asked me to, do something on the vision of banking, and then they kept on saying, well, yeah, but we need this piece of software behind it, and it's just like, well, you're not asking me to do. You're trying to sell this piece of software and get me to decorate it for you, and that's the kind of challenge. But then I worked for a second consultancy, which is a value that I maintain, which is you want, and I think it's something that came across in your talk, you want to be there because you can trust them. If the correct answer for the business you're consulting for is to go to somebody else and get them to do a piece of work for you, then that should be what you ask them. Similarly to the fact that, as I often said, I to my clients, I don't want you to need me anymore. I want to make myself redundant, and that is my intention. And then obviously when they need somebody like yourself again, they will come back to you. So it's just like, I guess, kind of aligning, but just at the back of that, people trying to understand, what is the consultant trying to sell you? What is their business model? And how are they going to make money out of this? Yeah. If you kind of think of it from that perspective, I think it's useful when you take on consultants.
I totally agree. And but again, it's like what's the ethos that underpins it, right? So I feel like I'm wired quite differently to a lot of people in my marketplace, in a couple of ways. But one way is I fundamentally believe money follows value, not value follows money, right? So what I mean by that is, if I do the right thing by people that I work with, and I do good things in the world, and I make it my business to try and go and be supportive and constructive, in the end, business takes care of itself. Now, it's not quite that simple. As with the old Sufi phrase, trust in God, but tie your camel. I still have to tie my camel. I still have to make sure we have good business practice. Do you see what I mean? But fundamentally, I'm like, do the right thing, and then actually, usually, things will take care of themselves. I think a lot of consultants go value follows money. So in other words, we just need to get the money in, and then we'll work out how to justify that with the client. And I think that's much, much less healthy, actually, because I think it does hardwire you to go, actually, now we just need to be in cross and upsell mode. I say to my clients, I'm never, ever going to sell you anything that you don't need. And I genuinely stand by that. The flip of it, by the way, is that when I do tell them they need something, I frankly expect them to listen to it. Do you know what I mean? In the context of the relationship. So I think it's about the underpinning ethos. I think that is something which matters hugely in all of this. And I think it is also about, you want to try and find people who represent good ethical behavior in the market. That's my sort of sense of it.
Thanks, Neil. Peter.
Hello, I apologise if my bandwidth is low, but
Peter, you're breaking up. Peter, we're struggling to hear you, mate.
Just enough.
Would it be
bandwidth to apologise for the lack of bandwidth?
Yeah, don't apologise. Pop your question into the chat, maybe.
No, good.
Yeah?
Yes, I think Peter there sort of illustrates.
Yeah. I'll leave.
Peter, you're illustrating a very important truth, which is by starting to say, I apologize for the lack of bandwidth, you're kind of throwing down a gauntlet to the universe there that it has basically gone, yep, we're going to challenge that. Anybody else got anything else they want to say?
I've got something for you, Phil. You mentioned a word earlier that I particularly appreciate and value: grit. Have you got an example of that? Or when you've used grit in a time working with a founder?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, it's a really oddly emotive question, that, Ollie, because I would tell you actually after about 11, 12 years that the one thing that this has been, it's sort of been less so now, but you get your times doing this. One of the reasons I'm founding the consultancy business is just because of how hard and lonely the world of independent consulting actually can be. and I know I was writing this the other day, actually, I know Pity the Consultants is not exactly an Oscar-winning tearjerker, right? But it's a tough old game to actually do this for a long time. So the overwhelming odds are against you in consulting. There were 34,000 consultancies founded in the UK last year and 30,000 consultancy insolvencies in the UK, right? This is a tough game, right, that I'm in. So at one level, all of it's great, right, I suppose is where I go. Now, in terms of founder relationships specifically, absolutely. An example of it, years and years ago, we were working with a scale-up, a healthcare scale-up based out of Berlin. So, and I love working with founders, really, really do. And this particular healthcare scale-up, two of the board members were husband and wife as well. And as always with people, the place that I come from, Ollie, is to understand that everybody's just trying to do their best all the time. That is my genuine experience of human beings. And this business was really, really struggling. It was struggling to find a route to market. It was struggling to find a way to organize its people in order to identify routes to market and ultimately to get growing, right? And the marketplace complexity is considerable in healthcare, as I'm sure you appreciate. And also the nature of these specific blind spots that existed in that leadership team, not only around the commercial opportunities in their market, but how best to organize their people, were also considerable. And it was not going to be one of those situations in which you walk in as a consultant or as a consulting team and immediately find the answer. It just wasn't going to be that at all. And we had an incredibly challenging 6 months worth of work with that organization. And the grit really came in actually at the level of the relationship. The conversations we were having to have with them, which was, I know this is frustrating. I know that it feels like the answer should be here already. We need to hold the line. We need to hold the line. And a combination of just really open and honest conversation about where the business was, why the business had got there, the dynamics that were going on across that leadership team, and ultimately what it was going to actually take to find the answers that they were looking for, actually in the end was the secret to unlocking the whole thing, because it gave everybody the confidence to keep going. So radical honesty in that situation about these are the challenges we've got ahead of us, and it is going to take us 6 months. It isn't going to take us 6 days, and it is going to cost you more money than you want. But I promise you, if we keep going, in 2 months, things will look better. 3 months, things will look better. And 6 months, things will look better. That level of clarity and candor in the conversation gave everybody the confidence to keep going. So that kind of thing happens more than you might think. Again, it's back to that point about minimum viable engagement. If I can solve a problem in 6 days, that will delight me. Sometimes it just takes a bit longer. And we see it in our corporate work as well. It's just changing things takes time sometimes.
Thanks, Phil. Brilliant. That's brilliant. Any final questions for Phil whilst he's with us this morning? No.
We missed Peter, didn't we?
We missed Peter. Peter, have you? I think Peter might be struggling with connection this morning. Gideon.
Okay.
Thanks, Ollie. It's not really a question. Just how do we kind of stay in touch with you, Phil? What's the best way? You're on LinkedIn, Twitter? Do you have a newsletter, that sort of thing?
Oh, well, there you go. Thank you for asking me the question about self-promotion, which is always the bit that I don't do. If you can see my different businesses at philhq.com. I will send you these charts just in case they're useful. I don't know if you circulate charts, but I'll whiz them over to you. And if you want them, you can have them and send them around, do with them what you will. If you go to philhq.com, you will see the links to different businesses on there. The mentoring business is the one that's most appropriate to founders. And for consultants, the consultancy business also. And there's various things you can sign up for and do depending on which track you go down. All of my work's really simple, actually. In the end, it's all about one very simple observation, which is that as human beings, we're really good at getting in our own way in terms of trying to create the outcomes that we're looking for. And as organizations, we're really good at getting in our own way. So I just do the same thing with different folks, really, whether it's big businesses or smaller founder-led businesses, or whether it's independent consultants. I'm just there to help people understand how they're getting in their own way and then remove those blockers and barriers. So yeah, thank you for that question, Gideon. I really appreciate it. Is there something in the chat as well?
Yeah, Henry's just said, brilliant stuff. Thank you. Lots of word nuggets and really useful. And that has been extremely useful this morning, because the topic of consultants has come up a lot recently in startup to stand-up meetings. And when I spoke to you the other week, Phil, I thought this is a brilliant opportunity to get you in and talk about it candidly, because I've as I told you, I've used consultants, some really good, some not so, and they can have a devastating effect on your business if you've engaged with them incorrectly and that your values aren't aligned. And I think what you've done for us this morning is absolutely excellent. Now get ready for a tirade of love and big ups on LinkedIn today. That's what you're going to get from us.
Well, there's a first for everything, Ollie. That's what I'll say to you on that one.
Yeah.